In 2023, Sony gave customers some bad news. Purchased content was going to be removed from their libraries. The problem is that they had some trouble getting into a licensing agreement with Discovery, who originally provided the content. And since that agreement wasn't going to be renewed, that meant that customers who had already paid for the content were no longer going to be able to access it. People understandably got quite angry, and Sony quickly backtracked. They were able to work out some kind of deal, and people were able to keep the content that they had paid for. This isn't just a problem that Sony has, though. Amazon could remove movie purchases at any time as well. It's also not just a problem with movies. It could be television shows, or in the case of Amazon, it could be things like ebooks. And if we look at the wider digital landscape, you'll see that this could also happen on iTunes, or basically any of the services that Apple provides, as well as Steam when you're buying stuff like video games. For the most part, if you are buying digital content online, you don't own it. This has become such a widespread problem that California recently passed a law forcing these marketplaces to disclose that you were actually purchasing a license and that this license came with terms, and that meant that the license could also be revoked. In general, I would say ownership rights are being eroded. We are shifting away from a model where when you pay for something, you get to keep it, toward a model where you are simply licensing something or you have to sign up for some kind of perpetual subscription. You may have heard this phrase actually, you will own nothing and be happy. We'll talk about the origins of that phrase, what it means, all of that a little bit later in this video. Because this is a video where I want to explore all of the issues with digital ownership and the erosion of ownership rights in the modern world. It's also basically just a video where I tell you to buy physical media because physical media, for the most part, doesn't come with DRM. So let's say that I go to a bookstore and I try to buy this book. Well, if I give them money for it, I get to take this copy of the book home, and this particular copy, I basically have unfettered rights to do with it as I see fit. I could read the book, I can just keep it on a shelf and never touch it. That happens with a lot of books that we buy. I could also burn it, I could try to eat it, I could do whatever I want with it. Now, there are a few things that I can't do. Like I can't make a copy of the content and then sell it, or make a copy of a content and then distribute it for free. So owning media has always come with some conditions. But for the most part, if you bought it, you could keep it, and it was yours to do with as you saw fit. You can also decide that once you're done with this book, you can sell it to somebody else. You can resell it. But that has never been the case with your digital content. This was a small legal controversy about a decade ago. A company named Redigi tried to open up a marketplace where owners of digital media could sell copies of that media once they could prove that they had gotten it from a legal marketplace, and also using some technology that Redigi was developing, they could prove that they no longer would access the media. They were trying to make it possible for you to resell your digital content without you just keeping copies stored on your hard drive and making a profit illegally. But the music industry in particular did not like this, and so in 2012, Capitol Records actually sued Redigi. There has been an ongoing legal battle. Redigi has tried to even take this to the Supreme Court, but the rulings have been pretty clear. The idea that you could sell digital content is just not legally viable. This all comes down to the applicability of something called the first sale doctrine. I am not a lawyer, I am not giving you legal advice, and I'm not doing legal analysis. This is what I could learn just by reading articles about this case. The first sale doctrine is what protects your right to be able to resell physical goods that you buy. There have been challenges to the first sale doctrine. Different companies have tried to restrict it, but in general, if you buy something, you can sell it to somebody else later on. And the question was, does the first sale doctrine apply to digital purchases? And the courts have basically answered no. Because of all of this, Redigi was shut down in 2013. They have tried to keep up a legal fight, but I'm not particularly optimistic. At one point, both Amazon and Apple were working on similar technology. They had this idea that you could track ownership of digital goods. They actually applied for patents. That's how you can find out about this. And these ideas seem to die with that Redigi case. This kind of shows how fundamentally digital ownership is legally different from ownership of physical goods. So consider this case. If you were to buy a $50 piece of software because you think you're going to need it for your job, and you use it for, let's say, a month and a half to make sure that you're past any trial period, and you decide that you don't want to use it anymore, that it's actually just not for you, or it's not necessary, or you just don't like the software. The question is, what could you do with that software? In most cases, it just sits on your hard drive or you delete it, and it's not like you could pass it on to somebody else. Let's say you bought some digital art software, you figure out you're not a very good artist, so you decide to pass it on to a friend who is a good artist but needs new software. Well, you can't really do that legally. Maybe you have some tech workarounds for this, but in general, you can't do it. And the same is true for books and movies and television shows, music, all of that. Unless you physically give someone your e-reader or your iPod, those don't really exist anymore, but I think you get the idea. Unless you physically give them the device where that software lives or where those files live, there's no way to give it to somebody else. Kindle at one point even had a lending option where you could let friends or family read your Kindle books, and they had a way of making sure that you couldn't access those books on your Kindle at the same time, but kind of quietly, Amazon deprecated that feature, so you can't do that anymore. If you have an ebook that you really like and you want someone else to read it, they either need to get it from their library or they have to buy it for themselves. They can't borrow it from you. And I think that's a really important difference, because in a world where you cannot lend something to someone or give it away for free when you no longer want to use it, what we are essentially forced to do is become perpetual customers. This idea that you should become a perpetual customer, by the way, is not only limited to the media that we've discussed so far. I'm going to talk about two hobbies of mine that I've never brought up on the channel before, and that is tabletop role-playing games and, on occasion, Magic the Gathering. So you might know that nowadays Dungeons and Dragons and Magic the Gathering are owned by the same company. At some point, TSR, which had developed Dungeons and Dragons, was bought by Wizards of the Coast. Wizards of the Coast, of course, is the company that published Magic the Gathering. Then Wizards of the Coast was purchased by Hasbro. So now Hasbro, this giant toy company essentially, owns Dungeons and Dragons and Magic the Gathering. I think that if you follow news about either Dungeons and Dragons or Magic the Gathering, you kind of know the narrative about Hasbro, which is that Hasbro is basically obsessed with extracting as much value from these franchises as possible, and they don't seem to really care about how players or just fans of these franchises are actually thinking about it. One of the ways that Hasbro has decided to monetize these platforms is by moving to the digital realm. Now, in some ways, this is really great. If you want to play Dungeons and Dragons or another kind of tabletop role-playing game with your friends and you don't always meet in person, you can play doing something called a VTT. That's a virtual tabletop. You could also use a service that Wizards of the Coast developed called D&D Beyond. And we'll talk about my complaints with D&D Beyond in just a second. And then for Magic the Gathering, they have both Magic the Gathering Online and Magic the Gathering Arena. I have never played online. We'll only talk about Arena for these examples. One of the features of D&D Beyond is that you can actually buy the core rule books or any of the supplemental text for Dungeons and Dragons in D&D Beyond. As you could maybe see though, I have an entire shelf for tabletop role playing, so I do not buy from D&D Beyond. I think you could already see where this is going though, because if you buy digital content from D&D Beyond, it is just like all the other digital content in the world. You do not actually own it. You are just purchasing a license to it. At some point, people are going to get tired of me just showing terms of service on the screen, but I feel like I have to every single time. All these companies are basically the same. If you're buying digital content, you are not actually buying it. You are licensing it, and they can take it away from you or they can change it. On top of that, D&D Beyond has a subscription, and subscriptions, of course, are another way where we are turned into perpetual customers. So if you pay a monthly fee, you get early access to the new books. And if you pay an even higher monthly fee, you get even earlier access to the new books, which I guess is for those really hardcore fans. But you also have the ability to now share the content that you bought with other people on D&D Beyond, as long as they're your friends. But notice what's just happened. Your right to share things that you quote unquote own, because at this point we know you don't really own it, your right to share that content is contingent on paying a monthly fee. If you ever stop subscribing, you can't share that content anymore. Think of Magic the Gathering and Dungeons and Dragons as these really great in-person hobbies. Maybe the only thing that is more tactile and tangible for nerdy hobbies would be something like Warhammer 40K, which those are off camera, but there are some unpainted minis in this office that I will never show anybody. But I think of these as these great experiences of being around a table with your friends. And sometimes we move to these digital tools because we feel like, oh, maybe this will be nice if we can't always meet in person, or if I just don't have a play group around me. And I understand that. But we do kind of inherently lose something when we move to these environments, But what's worse is that the companies that own these franchises, that own these intellectual properties, also see moving to digital as a way to gain a perpetual revenue stream. In the case of Magic the Gathering Arena, this is a little bit different. Arena is technically free to play. So you could just log on to Arena and start playing, but as new cards come out, you are, let's say, highly incentivized, if you're really into playing Arena, to start spending a lot of money on cards, to the point where you could spend as much money playing Magic the Gathering Arena as you would if you just bought Magic cards from your local game store or online. And if you follow any kind of news in the hobbies there, you will know that the cost of those cards, boxes, booster packs, everything like that, has just gone way, way up. Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro are just, they are trying to get your dollars really, really badly. Okay, so when you move on to a thing like D&D Beyond or Magic the Gathering Arena, you should ask what happens when Hasbro decides to not support those platforms anymore. Now, for now, D&D Beyond is doing okay. But you hear this news, especially that Dungeons & Dragons is not making as much money for Hasbro as they'd really like. There's been some troubling corporate news. I try not to follow that stuff too closely, but if you're in the hobby at all, you follow along. If for some reason D&D Beyond ever went away, you would lose complete access to all of those books. And that's different than like if you're like me and you just buy the books. In fact, I have 3.5 rule books that are still in my mom's basement that I should really get out because she keeps telling me that I am in my 30s and I should finally get all of my books from her house. And that's probably true, but I mean, I could still go find my old 3.5 books. And because I own the 5 ebooks, but I also own, sort of alternative games like Pathfinder or Shadow Dark, then I can just consult those books just by looking at my shelf. Also, a lot of the smaller publishers in the indie space will just give you a PDF. They know that they're risking being pirated, but they're doing right by their customers and just giving you PDFs when you buy the books. I think that's a great model. But you might be thinking that Hasbro would never shut down D&D Beyond or Magic the Gathering Arena. But here's the thing. Companies go out of business. Companies also sell franchises and things get lost in the mix. Sometimes teams that support software just go away. And I at least have been on the internet long enough to know about companies who take beloved products and then just sort of unexpectedly and for no apparent reason, at least one that's available to someone looking from the outside, just drop the service completely. Now think about all of the companies where you're buying digital goods. Maybe you buy them from Hasbro through these platforms. Maybe you buy them from Amazon. Maybe you buy them from Apple. Just keep adding this up and you realize in all likelihood, some of those are going to go out of business. Some of those are going to suffer some sort of catastrophic data loss. Some of those are going to have something go wrong, and you're going to lose the things that you paid for. If you're like me, though, and you have tried to switch over to buying almost exclusively physical media, that can't happen. Now, obviously, there are downsides to buying physical media. I have to store all this stuff. I just mentioned that I have books that are still in my mom's basement. That's across the country. I have to find some way to get those books to Texas. But those are downsides that I'm usually okay with. They're inconvenient, but I get to keep the stuff that I pay for. That is the most important thing for me. Okay, we hinted at this a little bit by talking about D&D Beyond, but let's talk about this problem of moving towards perpetual subscriptions. Now, nobody actually objects to all subscriptions, and I think it's helpful to make a couple of distinctions. So for instance, I subscribe to a couple of newspapers and magazines. My understanding of that subscription is that I get ongoing access to those newspapers and magazines and to their websites, and that in return, I pay them a monthly fee, but my monthly fee helps them create new content. Like the fact is that because I subscribe to, say, the New York Times, well, then I'm helping bring tomorrow's New York Times paper out that I then get to read. And it's like that too for things like newsletters. So I write on Substack as well as doing stuff on YouTube. If you wanted to check out my Substack, there is a link down below. And while I do give most of my content away for free, actually, I do rely on subscriptions on Substack for a decent chunk of my income. Some people do that just because they want to support my work, and for that I'm very thankful. But I think enough of them also realize that by paying that monthly subscription fee, they're just helping to guarantee that I can continue to produce content that they enjoy. So I don't think we're ever going to live in a world that's free of subscriptions, and I have to be transparent and say that I make part of my living through a subscription. But what's most troubling is when we've moved to subscriptions for things that previously you could just simply pay for. And the thing that I'm mostly talking about here is software, and the real villain of this story would be Adobe. So the Adobe software, you probably know, has this whole Creative Suite, and the Creative Suite has really kind of cemented itself in a lot of different creative industries like publishing, using InDesign for typesetting and things like that, but also using Photoshop. I use Photoshop regularly for my channel, and you could also do things with like Audition and Premiere, so in sound and in video editing. Illustrator, there's just, for a lot of different creative industries, Adobe has become one of the biggest players, possibly the biggest player. Well, Adobe at one point decided that they were going to stop selling products like Photoshop, and instead they were going to move to a subscription model. And it's a pretty pricey subscription. If you want to subscribe to the Creative Cloud, the cost of that annual subscription ends up being close to $700. Now, it's a business expense. We try to justify it, but it is pretty expensive. And it's not like every company in this space is doing that. So I actually now use DaVinci Resolve to edit all of my videos, at least when I'm editing them on my own. And DaVinci Resolve lets you purchase a license to their software just once. And actually, so far, Resolve has given me updates for every major update. I have been able to get that software and for free. I don't have to keep buying it again. And I think one day maybe Resolve is going to say, hey, you bought your license 7 versions ago. If you want new updates, you're going to need to pay $300 again. But at that point, I would have been using it for years, and I'd probably be okay with paying if they ever did that. But they've also given no indication that they're going to. They just keep giving me updates, even though I only paid for their stuff once. So I don't have to keep giving Blackmagic, the company that owns Resolve, my money in order to enjoy the thing that I already paid for. But of course, with Adobe, as soon as you stop subscribing, you can't use Photoshop, you can't use Premiere, you can't use any of that. Okay, maybe you don't work in a creative industry though. Are you also affected? And the answer to that is yes. HP wants to turn printers into a subscription service, essentially. Brother is another printing company with a subscription. And at least according to what I saw on Reddit, if you cancel your subscription with Brother, the toner that they sent you while you had an active subscription will just stop working. There is DRM, that's digital rights management software. There is DRM on your toner in your printer. And in the world of automobiles, you're also seeing subscriptions. Okay, so I think that luxury brands are the ones that are really pushing subscriptions in automobiles. I don't know if that's just because people who buy a BMW just have a lot of disposable income, or if because people who buy BMWs are stupid. I don't know what the explanation is, but I know that it's like BMW and Mercedes both sell subscription. In the case of BMW, even if your car had the hardware for heated seats, you would have to pay a monthly fee in order to access that hardware and actually have heated seats in your car. And Mercedes sells something called digital extras, and one of those is acceleration increase. So you can buy software or like the rights to use parts of your car so that your car will accelerate faster as long as you're subscribing. This is like the automobile equivalent of downloading more RAM, except the RAM's already in your computer and you just have to pay a subscription fee in order to use the RAM. But that's what you can do, I guess, if you buy a Mercedes. So we're not quite there yet, but I think this means that we are essentially moving towards a post-ownership world. A world in which the car that you paid for, or the printer that's sitting by your desk, or the books that you have downloaded that just aren't really yours. So that brings us to this phrase, you will own nothing and be happy. That phrase actually originates kind of from an article that was published by the World Economic Forum. Because of what I'm about to talk about, the World Economic Forum actually took that article down. You have to use the Internet Archive's Wayback Machine in order to access it. I will post a link down below. You should actually read this article if you're interested in these issues, because the article is just not what you would expect given the way that people talk about that article. The ideal seems to be that we live in such an abundant world that we've just moved past ownership and we can just rent things as needed, but that it's actually made our lives much better. Things are not free, but they're at least freely available for anyone who needs them. So when the writer says that she owns nothing in this imagined 2030 or 2035, whatever the year was, she's trying to imagine a more optimistic future. It almost reads like a utopian document. It's like describing a world where nobody owns a car, not because cars have been banned or because you have to continue to pay a subscription to your car, but because public transportation is just so good that nobody sees it as necessary to go and buy a car. It's not an article where you're being trapped in perpetual subscription and license hell. But the phrase, "you will own nothing and be happy," does have tremendous mimetic potential. So anytime this is ever discussed on YouTube with anybody, you will see it in the comments. And it's become like a bit of an ironic catchphrase because we're moving towards a world, it seems, where we own nothing, but none of us are happy about it. There's a recent book that I read that kind of touches on some of these issues that I want to highlight, and that's by Yanis Varoufakis. It's a book called Technofeudalism. So in this book, Varoufakis thinks that we have moved past capitalism and a world where ownership of capital is what determines your power, and we've moved into something that he calls cloud capitalism, but he also sometimes calls it techno-feudalism. The idea here is that companies and those in power are mostly interested in extracting rent from us, like in a feudal system. But instead of renting the right to work the land, we're actually renting the rights to access the cloud, or renting the right to access large digital infrastructures which allow us to live our lives in the modern world. I'm not really convinced by the larger framework that Varoufakis puts. I'll be honest, I actually wasn't that impressed by the book, but I do think it was at least touching on some important issues here. Namely, it seems to locate this problem where more and more we are becoming perpetual renters, whether that means that we have to subscribe to things that ordinarily you should not have to subscribe to, or even when we pay once, we're really just getting a license to something and it can be revoked. You know, the stuff is still owned. It's just not owned by large swaths of people. It's mostly owned by corporations. Could you imagine a world where you have to subscribe to your toaster and your microwave and your oven? With the rise of smart devices and things, I don't think that world's that far away. Everybody laughed when people said that they were going to make you subscribe to features in your car. That is now just a thing that automobile manufacturers do. Could you imagine Amazon eventually saying, hey, it's great that you bought those books on your Kindle, but if you want to access your Kindle in the future, you're going to have to pay a $3 subscription. You know, maybe that's not a good business decision for them, but I could see them at least thinking about it. Okay, so I think if we're being honest, we have to admit that there's not a lot that any one particular person can do. I make videos about this topic and try to talk about it in a little bit of depth, mostly the hope that I'll just change some minds whenever I talk about it, but it's not like any kind of messaging that I have ever created has changed Amazon's policies. But there are a few little things that I do in my own life that maybe you want to try and do yourself. So one of those is that in my case, I've just stopped buying digital content. The biggest one for me was that I stopped buying books on my Kindle, and I did this because I don't trust Amazon, and I want to actually own the books that I read. I'd like to be able to revisit them in the future. I want to give my son my books. Even if he doesn't want them, I'm going to leave them for him when I die. Some people, when they talk about this issue, say that we should all switch to Kobo. Kobo has basically all the problems as Amazon. The terms of service are pretty much identical when it comes to these issues. So just switching from Kindle to Kobo isn't the answer. If you really want to use an e-reader, you need to find one that's a little more open. I think books is a little bit better. And then you need to find a way to locally own your files, make sure they don't have DRM, and then you can do with them as you see fit. Now, every time I've mentioned this before, people have asked me how to do this. The problem is I can't do tech tutorials. I'm really bad at it. I hate explaining that kind of stuff, and I don't understand the complexities enough. I am going to have a link down in the description, though, to a playlist of videos I have made that are essentially all of the best tutorials for things like using books, DRM, all of that stuff. It's all down below, so tech questions should be answered by that playlist. But of course, you don't need tech support if you just buy physical books. So if that's a possibility for you, I highly recommend that you pursue that option instead. Another thing is that there are larger political initiatives that I would encourage people to try and support. I don't talk about explicit politics on this channel very often. I don't talk about candidates on this channel. I don't talk about political parties. I think that it's more interesting to talk about issues and ideas. But in this case, I will say that if you find an organization that is supporting the right to repair, this is one of the fronts in this ongoing war. Organizations that want to support the right to repair are trying to codify into law our abilities to repair, modify, and resell things that we buy. There's a whole issue that I could have brought up in this video about farmers wanting to modify the software in their John Deere tractors and being unable to. And you could totally imagine a world where farm equipment becomes a matter of subscriptions rather than just plain old ownership. This is also just part of a larger battle about our rights in the digital world. And for that, I have donated in the past to things like the Electronic Frontier Foundation, which is basically a civil liberties organization for the digital world. I think that's about as close to a political endorsement as I'm ever going to get on this channel, which is to say support Right to Repair and support the Electronic Frontier Foundation. It's a worthwhile cause and it's a worthwhile organization. You should try to vote with your dollars as well. If a company is selling you a printer and then they tell you that in order to access that printer, you would have to pay a subscription, even if it's a cheap subscription, do not buy that printer. If a company says, hey, let me buy these digital goods, but with those digital goods, you don't get any rights of ownership, do not buy them. If you're looking for a new car and then you find out that, whatever car maker wants to sell you a subscription to heated seats in the future, don't buy that car. That is overall small, but purchasing decisions do make some difference. If you object to the way that the company is treating you, stop giving them your money. The world is facing a lot of problems now, and maybe you're the type of person who wants to try and make a difference and try to solve one of those problems. Well, one of the ways that you can do that is by trying to have a high impact career. Your career is 80,000 hours on average. You're going to spend a lot of time working, and if you want to make a positive difference in the world, choosing the right career can be a great way to do that. 80,000 Hours is a nonprofit that helps you find a fulfilling career that does good too, and they are generously sponsoring this video. For the last 10 years, they've done research on how to find a fulfilling career. It's not just about doing what you're passionate about or finding a job that makes a lot of money. There's more to it than that. They have a website where you can find all of their research and guides on how to have that high impact and fulfilling career. You can find career reviews, decision-making tools like career guides, and also profiles of some of the biggest problems that the world is facing. You'll also find a free career guide full of concrete, practical advice helping you to find that high impact career. They want to help you develop a full career plan with confidence. And if you're looking for a specific job, well, you could check out their job board. This is a curated list of active job openings that 80,000 Hours think can help you have a positive impact on the world. Everything they provide is free. They're a nonprofit and their only goal is helping you to find that career. You can go to my link down below to sign up for their free in-depth career guide. This helps you learn about high impact careers and identify high impact career paths. On top of that, they will help you make a plan for how to put what you've learned into action. This will also sign you up for 80,000 Hours newsletter, but don't worry, you can unsubscribe from that newsletter with a single click. So head to 80,000hours.org/Jared Henderson to help you find a career that is meaningful, fulfilling, and will help you solve one of the world's most pressing problems.